I welcome you, one and all, to episode 13 of this series called Dream of the Week. This episode is about the delvings into the depths of our psyche. I call it Basement of the Mind. Now, come with me, friends, as we make a journey. I stand in the middle of a great basement, its limits beyond the range of sight, its corners blackened by darkness. Here lay various boxes and crates containing stored goods, supplies, and foods. I know this place well. It is a basement of a house. No, the house. A great and limitless house that I have seen only in my dreams. A place that appears periodically in my life during times of change, learning, and integration. This house is a magical place. A place of power and occult might, containing darkness as well as light. Here I am again, in the basement, at the root of it all. I examine the various goods here, then notice something out of place, an old, unidentifiable appliance that is shorting out, sparking with loose electricity. I know it has been like this for years, but I finally noticed it. I unplug and restart it, solving the problem at last. Then I begin exploring the rest of the basement. Slowly I notice the presence of workers, not present as physical people here, but as thought forms. They operate a sort of grid, a grid that connects and runs the various parts of this house, a normally invisible network that I now see as a system of holographic geometries that spiral in various directions and click together at key points to supply power and creation to all the house above. I then connect with another person who shows themselves to me as a child, a small girl, yet I can tell she is something more, a representative of a higher grid still, a grid that controls the highest functions of this house, which I know to be the mind. I commune with this child via meditation, linking her in the vast mental network that she represents. I know intuitively that as master of the house, I must learn to become truly adept at using this network. Shortly after, the dream fades into another sequence. So there we have it, a foray into the basement, the bottom part of a house. I've talked before on this series, as well as on the blog, about houses. I say there could be a lot of debate on what various symbols mean to people, what they ultimately mean in the minds of every dreamer. Though, the house is an interesting one in that, to me, it pretty much means the mind, or the state of mind that you're in. I've studied a couple different systems of dream interpretation, and a lot of them agree that, yeah, the house represents your frame of mind. In a two-part article I had on the blog, I talked about my experiences with houses and dreams. Some of the more common houses that appear in my dreams, as I've discussed before, represent a more ordinary state of mind, like the house I grew up in as a child, or if I dream of the house I'm living in now. But in the second article on dream houses, I discussed this other dream house. House I started dreaming about maybe around 10 years ago, when my spiritual path got really accelerated. This isn't always a house of happy dreams. It ain't always a house that depicts situations of love and light. When I first started dreaming about it, well, it showed me some pretty dark situations. The house was possessed by demons. It was ruled over by a lord of demons. There were monsters and ghosts in this house. But there were also some really cool things to be found. This is a place of secret passages. This is a place where you can keep going, room after room after room, and the house seems to expand into infinity, as I've noticed on several occasions. It's a house with a long history. Whenever I go there, I'm reminded of many, many other previous owners to the house, of previous what they call masters to the house. And here, this is master with a capital M. To be the master of this house in my dreams has very powerful connotations, occult connotations even. Master of the house is like an ascended master almost. Master of light and dark, a master of good and evil. a master of reality. Perhaps like the old He-Man series, a master of the universe. Which I did grow up with as a kid, so might be an influence in there. In my early dreams in this house, often I struggled against the master, who appeared to be a demon in many cases. And then many years ago, I drove out the demons from this house. I drove out the evil influences, and I took control of it. And I've had many dreams of being the master of this house, and of using that mastery to unlock these hidden chambers containing powerful secrets. Things like stargates, ancient tablets, or other really cool things. But beyond any of the stuff I literally see or experience in the house is this feeling I get there. A feeling that you could compare to what people have described as déjà vu. It's a feeling of strange and mysterious familiarity, of the profound, of those kind of mysteries. Not like a Sherlock Holmes sort of mystery, but like a sacred mystery. Like the question of what's inside the Ark of the Covenant, or what would happen if you drank from the Holy Grail. Powerful mysteries. That is the feeling that pervades this house. To me, it's a house of initiations, a house of empowerment. It doesn't show up in my dreams that often, except in periods of transformation, periods of learning, growth. There can be uncomfortable things in this house, but also really cool things. And it's the uncomfortable stuff that brings us shifts, that brings us transformations. Here, I find myself in the basement of this dream house. What is the basement representative of, you might ask? If the different parts of the house represent different parts of our mind, if, say, the ground floor is our conscious state of being, and the upper floor is a higher state of being, then the basement is that kind of dark part of our minds. I don't mean dark as in negative. I mean dark as in hidden. It's that dark part of our minds where we store everything, perhaps that we've experienced in this life, but also maybe in other lives, other incarnations, if you believe in that kind of thing, if you're open to that kind of thing. And like I said before, this dream house is a house with history. It's a place that goes deep to many previous owners, which you might dub previous lives. Here I'm in the basement, and I'm examining all the things I've stored down here. All this food, which, if you've been following this, I tend to think of as being knowledge. Knowledge I've stored from this lifetime and perhaps others. Looking out over all these various useful things in the basement. But since they're in the basement, it's stuff that I haven't been using that actively. Because you don't store what you use in the basement. You store what you don't use. And I find an old device down here. It's an appliance, that much I can tell, but in the dream I couldn't quite recognize what sort of appliance it was. It's something I hadn't used in a long time. And it was sitting here, sparking around, obviously about to malfunction. It's clearly, at least to me, a representation of some kind of faculty in my mind. Some kind of process that I hadn't been utilizing that needed a reset. Now, what exactly can that mean? It's probably hard to talk about it or explain it, but I'm sure in the deep parts of our mind, we're always going through these little shifts and alterations. And a lot of times, especially those dreams that don't make a lot of sense, might be representations of these little inner shifts that go on. Maybe it's nothing we see in our outside worlds, but it's still important. Basically, I took something in the inner part of my mind, in that deepest, darkest part of my mind, and I restarted it. Changed a thought process. And then I began connecting with this huge and vast grid or network that seems to be underlying the house on this whole other level. I don't see it like an electrical set of wires down in the basement. I see it as these sets of holograms that appear in front of me, like a 3D series of these spiraling interconnected geometries. To me, what's this mean? It's not even symbolic, really, because I kind of know it in the dream. These are mental pathways. These are paths that thoughts take. And there's these various people representative of different parts of my mind that are workers here. Now, I know the brain isn't necessarily the whole mind. In various spiritual ways of thinking, the brain is just kind of the physical representation of the mind. But if you think of a brain and the brain's pathways, it's neurons, one sending little electrical impulses to the next, creating your thoughts, creating these patterns your thoughts follow. Well, here in this dream, I'm seeing that process unfolding. And even before I was really starting to think of houses in general as representing the mind, I kind of saw similarities between this house and the way the brain was laid out, with the different hemispheres that this house kind of displays very accurately into different parts of it. You know, it's my limited knowledge of the brain because I'm not a neuroscientist. So why would my thoughts be getting rewired? In addition to that process we always follow, where we're always changing our ways of thinking. At least those of us who want to evolve and grow do this. I have also recently taken on a new teaching to integrate into my meditations. So on a real simple level, it could be an indication of that. It's kind of an old yogic breathing technique that the Kriya Yoga masters developed a long time ago and which was recently passed on to me. I'm already seeing it's having some awesome results. And I link with this child, this growing, evolving part of myself that is connecting me via meditation to an even higher state of being that's like the grid that I saw a moment before, and yet kind of on a more advanced level. And I have been ramping up some of my meditation techniques, some of my spirituality, and yes, that thought is evolving. I'll say this without spoiling too many of my plans, that I have recently been putting together my remaining plans for this life. You could say my blueprint for what I'm going to do in this world. I've been expanding my inner vision out. And yes, assisting it by increasing meditations and different techniques. And I didn't really talk about this in the narration, but the dream that came afterwards, that came immediately following this, was in fact a creative idea. A dream that's actually about the science fiction novel I'm working on. And that in fact was basically a way for me to start thinking about the story a little differently. So essentially, once these mind pathways are connected better, once our low unconscious stuff starts to get cleared out and reset, well, our thoughts work better and awesome ideas come to us. Whether it's creative ideas like mine about wacky stories, or maybe it's a business plan of yours, maybe it's an invention you're working on, or a song you're trying to write, or maybe you'll even get a good idea for asking a person out on a date or a presentation at work, whatever. So you might be looking at this dream and seeing that on the surface, it's kind of one of those weird, uninteresting dreams where just this kind of strange stuff happens. It doesn't have a very narrative focus to it. It's not a story like my Donald Trump dream before, or like the superhero dreams I've talked about on here. In a way, it's very simple. Yet, in another way, it goes very deep. If I were to sum up this dream in simple terms, this is a dream that showcases my inner mental activity, the changes that are taking place in my own mind. Perhaps even in the brain itself, which meditation has been shown to do. It shows these connections that weren't necessarily as strong before being strengthened and expanding out there. And it's a dream, as we clearly see, about mind mastery, of gaining control of my own mind. Which isn't to say I was some raging barbarian before, but I like to think of myself as ever growing, ever expanding. Even though there is not any one thing you could really call perfection, that I'm perfecting myself. The reason I chose this dream for Dream of the Week is because of the feeling there, of the feeling of really getting in tune with my own deep, dark stuff, of digging into those depths of the mind that you seldom see, and learning what's down there, and becoming connected with what's down there. It wasn't necessarily such a cool story as some of the dreams, but maybe if you look at something like this, you could start looking at your own dream houses too, or whatever landscapes you experience repeatedly in your dreams, and maybe you can find a similar area. I feel ultimately we all have them. Because I feel really we all have these places that we can access our mind in, that we can access what some people call the subconscious and what others call the unconscious. And we can dig up this cool stuff from in those depths, that unused mind material, and we can use it for some kick-ass things. Anyway, thank you all for watching this episode of Dream of the Week. For related material, I would suggest going to the blog, whose address you'll see posted at the bottom of this YouTube video, and checking out those 2 articles on dream houses I wrote, if you want to do that. Either way, I'll see you next week.